Welcome to Pipeline Profits, where we dive deep on everything sales and marketing. We are your host. I am Ryan Wykes. This is my co-host, Emma Pace. We are obsessed with sales and marketing. What's new? What's working? What's not? How do we do things better to deliver better service to all our clients? And today we have an amazing guest who is a marketing guru, a branding guru, and I'm going to let Emma take it away.
Yeah, so I'm pretty stoked for the guest that we have today. If we're talking predominantly to real estate agents, this guy not only owns his own real estate brokerage, but he actually also has his own media company. So on the topic of marketing, he knows a couple things, maybe just a thing or two. He has a knack for connecting with industry titans. So he's pretty good buddies with someone that we all adore, Ryan Serhant. And he is actually a trusted authority with Scott McGilvery for our Canadian folks that are listening or watching to this. He knows social media inside and out. He's always on top of all the current trends. He is the host of his own very kick-ass podcast, which is called Prime People. He is very hardworking. He's incredibly consistent. And I think after talking to this guy for 10 minutes, anybody will feel like they've probably known him forever. And so today, we are very, very, very fortunate to have the one and only Justin Konikow on the podcast.
That introduction was a little bit much. I'm a pretty simple guy, but thank you for having me.
I think you're pretty fantastic, man. I'm so excited to have you on the show today because obviously, as we know, the market's a little tough. And I think it's time for, agents to, specifically agents to really dig deep and get back to the foundations of what's worked. And so I really just wanted to kind of kick things off and get your kind of thought process of like, what do agents need to do today, end of 2023, to set themselves up for 2024 to get out of this slump that we're in right now?
Well, I think they're doing the right thing first by being in a place like this, right? I think who you surround yourself with is literally everything. In my opinion, this is the greatest opportunity to take market share I've ever seen in my career. And the second thing is you also address is back to basics, right? Like we talk marketing and we all know online marketing and these companies that basically use their own data to sell us back our own listings for a 25% referral fee are scrambling because it was already oversaturated. Now you bring in a market where online leads, the way to convert them has completely changed. I think a human connection and getting back to like, how are you actually talking to people? What are you equipped with market intelligence wise? How are you delivering that information? And then how are you following up is the only thing agents should be worrying about instead of chasing the next TikTok trend. Thinking that that's going to be the solution when it's actually very, very basic communication.
I think there's a lot of agents out there that feel that they do need to improve their market knowledge, right? So what would be 2 or 3 things an agent can do to quickly improve their market knowledge?
Average days on market, average price, and inventory levels, right? Like how many months of inventory? If I asked you that question and you're an agent watching this, do you know what that means? Do you know what a balanced market is? Do you know what a seller and a buyer's market is? And then when you're explaining that to a client, are you using real estate lingo or is it the education level of a 5th grader where they actually like nobody cares about learning real estate as much as us freaks do, right? Like we love what we do. So it's all good that like we can dive deep. But like when you're talking to consumers, I think delivering the information in a way where you're interpreting it more than telling them the numbers is the unlock for keys. So case in point, average price points in say Grand Bend may be posted at like 800,000. Is that the median price of like the homes that sold in the last month? Or is that the actual average price point? And what's the average price point of a lakefront property? And is a lakefront property a tear down? Does it have good beach? Does it have water levels that are going up or down? Like the minutia that the customer needs in terms of the interpretation, that is, if you over deliver on that, you'll win. But if you're just another agent posting a set of stats that every other agent's posting, nobody's ever going to call you, right? That's my opinion.
That was going to lead me right into the next question is how often are you putting time into gathering this data and digging into the data? Like, are you just waiting for your monthly board stats to come out? And what are some simple ways that you gather the data You gave some data points that you're looking for.
Sure.
What's the best way, and how often are you doing it, and how often do you recommend doing it?
So, I mean, if you're talking to a broad audience, newsletter, monthly market update, that's the easiest way to do it. Just go to your stats. I now pull all of the ITSO stats because I've realized that my audience, and I hate using those buzzwords, but they want to know what's happening in Southwestern Ontario, right? Some people do CREA. Tom Story, who's a friend as well, obviously, like he does very dialed in stats for Toronto. I think you need to determine who you're talking to and then talk to them once a month. To answer the original question though, it's every single time I'm going and doing my job. So the real way that I have the knowledge I have is I'm actually in production, right? So the mandates that I'm working on, I work with my team is like a Navy SEAL team that does residential, commercial investments. They do all asset classes. I have like commanders of each division. I will come in on marketing and strategy. They will give me the data point. So being in production, like I just appraised the building, it's kind of an office, kind of a warehouse. It's very unique. There's two ways for us to play it. Like being in it, I now have data points I didn't have 6 hours ago because I collabed with my commander and we're working through it. The Grand Bend stuff, I know it super well because I crushed that market. And like every time I go appraise a property, I'm doing a quick CMA and a 3-up report, looking at the comps individually. And then here's a super hack for you all. I'll actually pick up the phone and call the agents for 2 reasons. One, if we're buddies, Ryan, we're working in the same market, like I haven't talked to you in a bit. It's just nice to talk to you. That generates business and see what's going on in your world.
Yep.
Second, I said, you need to be able to interpret data. So if you sold a property and I'm confused at the price and everything else, and I just try and interpret it on my own, that's one thing. Anybody can do that. They can go on any third-party sold site and they can see that. If I call you and we've actually developed a real relationship, you're going to tell me why they took that price, the structure of it, how the deal got negotiated, and that no AI, no Amazon, no company can do, right? That human-to-human connection is how I develop the like minute interpretation of the data.
Why do you think so many agents are afraid to pick up the phone and call other agents though? Because I think what you just said is something that, you know, all three of us on here have got to a certain production level. And that has been a key element or a key component to help us get like the inside track or the sentiment that you can't pick up off of a spreadsheet, essentially. And why are agents so freaked out to call other agents and ask those questions, do you think?
I think it's imposter syndrome, to be honest with you, right? I think that's the biggest reason is they feel like they're not equipped to have the conversation. They're afraid that they're going to be asked about what they have going on or they don't have anything going on. On Thursday, actually on my podcast, I have Glenda Baker, Leonetti, Jeremy Knight, and Zach coming on to all talk about video in the same aspect. And I'm making a comparison. You'll understand it in a second. What we just talked about was the imposter syndrome of I don't want to call the top producer because there's this weird kind of dynamic in real estate where like you admire them, but you're kind of jealous. And there's this weird kind of vibe, right?
Yeah.
Social media is the same thing, right? The reason we're doing the podcast panel was we had put out a clip from the BAM podcast I did talking about why agents don't do video. And Jeremy DM'd me and he's like, hey, I feel like some people might see this and it might scare them out of doing video because they feel they're not good enough and people have imposter syndrome. And we're all pretty normal people. Do you guys want to do a panel talking about that? And it's the exact same reason people don't create content is they have imposter syndrome and they feel they're not equipped and they're not good enough. And we want to break that bubble. I think it's the same thing to answer the question that you just asked.
I want to bring this full circle for a second, because you were also saying at the beginning, when you're interpreting the data, you need to be able to explain what the data that you've interpreted, you need to be able to explain like you are to a 5th grader or a 5-year-old or whatever it happens to be, because ultimately you want to sound smart, but if you sound too smart, you make your clients feel dumb and then they don't feel connected with you. And so I think it's the same thing as us being comfortable being on video. Do you have any hacks? Like, do you use ChatGPT to help you kind of, express that in a more easy to understand way for your videos? Like, what's a great hack that somebody can use to be more comfortable explaining that in the right way?
Probably should. I think I consume a lot of content, right? And I think I watch it as a creator. So when I watch content, I look at how content I watch is delivered, and quite often less is more in delivery. I can go down wormholes and ramble, and I'm aware of that in myself. So like, I think it's consuming content from people I admire and developing my own style, being self-conscious enough to look at the things I want to improve on, like staying focused on the topic, not rambling for too long or going off track for people that don't know me, that, you know, and I think the more you do something, the better you get at it. So I don't use ChatGPT, but I use other people's content. And I also review how I'm producing my content and always make goals for adjustments that I want to make in it. And then I execute and then come back and execute. And it's not perfect, right? It takes time. And what I think I want to do, a lot of times, by the time I do, it ends up becoming a completely different thing, just like we talked about before we came on this live with the speaking stuff, right? So
for sure.
You made a really good point about the importance of relationships with other agents. And just to go back to that, something we were talking about before we jumped on the podcast here, and I know something that you've excelled at and has helped with the growth of your team and your business, is you've been able to develop really strong relationships with agents all over North America to build a huge base of referral partners and business partners throughout North America. Can you tell us a bit how and why you got started down that road, how you're able to build these relationships? What's the best way to find, other agents that, you feel you can trust and build with, for you to refer business to them and them to refer business to you, and how to keep those relationships strong to know that you're that referral partner that they're working with?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my background, actually running a place called Jim Bob Ray's for some period of time, where I like people, right? And I would run.
We're getting there. We're getting there for
I'm
sure.
sure we will. We'd have 500 people through that place. That was the capacity, 550. We may have gone over capacity a few times, but we have 1,500 people through in a day. And the guy that I admired, my mentor, Mike Smith there, he created something with that place in Joe Cool's in London that I've never seen replicated somewhere else. And that was an environment where you could have a guy in a $10,000 suit next to a guy that just came off a job site. Nobody was better than anybody else. Everybody was welcome. And it was a small enough place that you would bump into each other, and you would meet people by proxy, and you really did have a great community of people. Now, I think being in that environment, I'm actually probably a very extroverted introvert by nature. Surprisingly, given all the content I do, I didn't really enjoy going to like networking events, but I enjoyed serving the party, right? So I was like, as everybody's partying, I was like slugging garbage through there, just working or playing the music, or I was a bouncer, a manager, or a bartender. I was always better in a position of servitude than I was being somebody at the actual party. So I translate that into real estate from the exact same capacity, where most of my relationships came from, like, I could be watching Emma's content. She mentioned something about something she's working on. I'm like, oh, I know somebody who actually does that thing. Hey, talk to this person in the DM, right? And introduce Emma to somebody that could help her, because I know she saw it through Tom. And like, that literally is my entire life, and my entire story is by looking for ways to serve other people. Just by proxy, the other people would connect me with people who they thought were solid as well. And I've made mistakes. Like, I like everybody and I try and see the good in everybody too. I've been stabbed in the back a couple times where I'd rather be stabbed in the face, and that's just business. But I think it's being conscious of where you participate and not making it about yourself. So if you're an agent that wants to build a really good referral network, I would say one of the best ways to do that is by jumping into the community and being a people connector first, being the person, volunteer to help at these events. Everybody would love free help. If you're like, hey, I'll hand out the water, I'll put out the chairs. Like, if you guys are doing something, I'm happy to just be there. And it's interesting because a good friend of mine, Ramon Ray, is now like really good friends with Seth Godin, doing an event in New York in April. I'm going to end up being there. And he got to that place by being the guy that was serving water. So that long-winded answer of saying, it was typically by like just trying to be the super connector between different people. And then naturally, it just gave me more access and a really good network that I never thought I would have.
It's interesting because when you see people that are, producing or have got to a level of success like you have, and we've had several of them on the podcast, like our podcast that we did with Jazz, he said the exact same thing. Like, it doesn't just get in the room and add as much value in the room as you possibly can. But I sometimes think that, I don't know if we've just got to this environment because the market has been so great and we haven't felt like we really needed to help each other out in the last couple of years. But I think that when we talk to a lot of agents, it's always like, what's in it for me first? And I think that you have come to this with a, what's in it for you will pay me back dividends. And so the question I wanted to ask you said the thing about getting stabbed in the face versus stabbed in the back. How many times have you received something of benefit more than getting stabbed in the back for the work that you've done?
Not even close. Like, not even close. And to be honest with you, I make that statement only because I'm trying to be more conscious of what my cosign means, like me being on this podcast or me going places. Not that I'm special, but I've also seen in the influencer space, people will use other people's names and faces. Alex Hormozy talks about this all the time, where he's like, I won't do certain things because I know they're just going to use it, run ads, and then all of a sudden I'm repping something that I don't actually agree with, right? So I think when I make that statement, I could probably count on my hand the amount of times that happened. And I don't even really feel bad about it. I'm not salty about it because the version of Justin that person knew and the version that I am today is actually significantly better because they gave me clarity on who my people are and who my people are not. And I thank them every single day.
I love it, man. I actually just see a comment coming in here that says Jim Bob Rays. Hashtag London Classic. So I need to go back to Jim Bob's for a second, since clearly the viewers are as interested in your Jim Bob story as I am. So you worked at Jim Bob's. Amazing place, by the way. If you're listening to this and you're from outside of London and you didn't have the opportunity to have many drinks at Jim Bob Rays, I'm sorry. Ryan and I seem to both have, at some point in time, had fun there. And you were probably a big portion of it, and we didn't even know. So I need to know, in your 12 years of contributing to Jim Bob's, I need to know one crazy story that's happened there, man. I know I'm taking this off the real estate path, but there's some good stories that have happened if the walls can talk at Jim Bob's.
Oh, man, I could go through a bunch. There was one Brody Jenner story I cannot tell on this podcast.
Was he DJing?
No, he was out having a good time, too much of a good time. And oh man, there's so many. Honestly, if I think about Jim Bob's and a story that really kind of brings me back to, Bacon Fest, that's it. So Chris Evans, who's an absolute monster videographer, does music videos in LA, like probably one of the most prolific cinematographers in and around our territory, was working for Premier Productions at the time. And this is just one of my favorite stories because it reminds me of how Mike ran the business. And we were actually we were rebranding the restaurant. So from like 2005 to 2008, there was an element and a vibe that just wasn't the right vibe at Jim Bob. So my specialty was like rebranding, getting the right people in there. I was working in marketing communications and social media was just starting to come out. And we had GMs and other people that were involved. We're like, how do we get the right people in there? And I called DJ Hush, who's Derek Sung, who's a really good friend of mine to this day. And he ended up starting a company called Premier Productions. And they basically, the whole premise was, okay, we'll play country music for 6 months, get everybody out of the bar, empty the place out. Then we'll get everybody from like Kings and Western and just make it super accessible, make people feel safe and make it awesome. And let's do activations. So one of the activations was Bacon Fest. We cooked, 100 pounds of bacon and just put it on platters and fed it to everybody at Jim Bob's. And it was awesome. The video is still on YouTube. You can type in Bacon Fest, Jim Bob Rays. You can see Chris Evans as like a kid handing out the bacon. The reason that story to me stands out is Mike was always really good at allowing his people in his organization to treat the company like they were an owner themselves. Like one of my biggest pieces of education was I did every job in the company. By the end, Mike, I kind of created a job for myself as the marketing and communications manager. All that really meant was I went into each restaurant and I'm like, okay, this is how we're going to get people in. Like I was running down Richmond Street, handing out free pieces of pizza, like just testing different things and trying it at a speed of light. Where if you look at large corporate companies and people that are deemed like global competitors of mine, the way I'm taking mandates from them today is I am fast, I am nimble, and I can move at a speed that they cannot move their big ships with anymore. And the reason that I think that story translates nicely to this is anybody watching this, you have that ability in you. Like these guys starting this podcast, getting into thought leadership, look at how much they've accomplished in a short window of time. That exists in every single person out there if you have clarity on what your ambitions are and what actions might take you there. It does take a consistency of action, but again, if you're around good people, you'll naturally get to work. Otherwise, you'll watch everybody pass you by.
What?
With a culture like that, did you find, like, obviously you were there for 12 years. For somebody to work in a bar for 12 years, like I've worked in lots of bars and usually it was the opposite. It was like 12 days. What were you like the special one? I mean, the culture sounds pretty awesome. Or, was Mike able to create that culture that kept everyone around for a long time by making them feel like what you said there, like making them feel like they were an owner? Did that create a culture that, people worked there for a long time and stuck around and were willing to contribute and go above and beyond?
The second story that I'll share that answers that question is when I came to London, I came from Montreal. I was a transplant. So born and raised in Montreal, came here in 2000. And I got a job as a bouncer, 155 pounds soaking wet at Jim Bob Ray's. I'm like, what's Jim Bob Ray's? What did I sign up? Walk into the parking lot of Jim Bob's and Cool's, and there's a guy sweeping up cigarette butts. And walked up, I like the maintenance guy, walked up to him, started talking to him he talked my ear off for probably half an hour. And super nice guy. And then I went inside and somebody had seen me outside and they're like, do you know who that was? It was the guy that was like kind of doing my onboarding. I'm like, no. I was like, that's Mike Smith. He owns everything. And it really struck a chord with me that like he was out there happy as pie. Nobody was with him. Nobody was patting him on the back. He was sweeping up cigarette butts, right? He cared about the little. And I think that translates into everything he did in the business. He would be walking through the restaurant. He would see somebody that's been coming there for 20 years. He'd have a big meeting set and all these different people want to talk to me. He got an interview with CTV News and he would stop and talk to that person, maybe be late for the next meeting because he genuinely cared about people. I don't think that's something that you can fake. I think there's a lot of companies that have core values or mottos that are on a wall somewhere. But if the leadership does not live the core values and show it by their actions, you'll have constant attrition. I think the key to Mike's success was twofold: is he lived servant leadership every single day and he was about it. He didn't just talk, he talked less about it than he actually did it. The second thing was he kept people employed that probably shouldn't have been employed there for way longer than they should have been. And that's just because he's a good guy and he loves people. He kept one restaurant open for probably 2 years longer, losing money because he didn't want to fire the 15 people that worked there. And like that was one piece of his portfolio, and he could have just cut it saying, oh, you know what, I got to look after the profits. But he always took care of the people over the profits. And that's something that we've tried to ingrain at Prime, where the decisions we make are always geared around, is this the right decision for the person above the profit of the company or the transaction, right?
And thinking about that, you going, I want to like talk a little bit about your real estate journey now, because you had an incredible mentor outside of, you make the transition into real estate. I'm assuming you started as a solo agent and then transitioned into the brokerage thing, or am I wrong in thinking that?
Kind of wrong. So I know the mentor piece for people out there, like Mike didn't even really know he was my mentor. I considered him a mentor. I was always around him every opportunity I could. And it's probably not till now that he realized that I looked at him as a mentor for the last 20 years. And I've told him that many, many times since. So you guys can go find your mentors too. Real estate journey wise, I'd gotten married, found my wife, and unbelievable woman. They always say, find a woman, that sees the best inside of you, or that can grow gardens in the darkest parts of you, right? It's a song by Zach Bryan, an unbelievable track. And she was really somebody that would see that and like just saw this energy. And she's like, I need to turn that laser beam towards something that, we can do together. And I was very honest with Mike about it, and Ron, and those guys are like family. And I was like, if I don't try, I'll never know what was out there, right? Like I could have potentially gone down the path of ownership of the restaurants and different things, and like, equity and been a part of the organization. But my wife had always had this drive to create something from nothing. So she came from automotive, MBA from the Richard Ivey School of Business. She's an absolute killer, zero social media. You'd never even know that she's really the brains behind the organization, but we thoughtfully built it that way. And she threw me off a cliff into real estate. So we had looked at franchises. We actually almost purchased 2 franchises in London to open restaurants that would have been food service. We would have owned them. But we looked at the franchise agreements and we were like, we're buying a job. Like every 7 to 10 years, we basically have to re-up. We have to renovate the restaurant. Who knows what happens to hospitality? I'm like, it's hospitality. Like it's the same business. You're not going to see me until 2 o'clock in the morning on weekends. And, we didn't want that life. She had mentioned real estate. And my exact response was, I don't want to be a greaseball on a golf course. I work hard. I didn't know any agents that I actually admired, right? She tricked me into getting my license. I got my I was in commercial real estate to start. So she had actually been an agent 7 years before me. She had left real estate to take care of a family member going through some health stuff. And then we both got licensed. We actually wrote our license in North Bay of all things, like I think a year after we got married. It was the only place we could do the final course. And then we went on like a crazy road trip across America, came back, And it was one of the worst markets of all time. We joke because I still own the trademark and the website for the closers.ca. I don't know if it's active or not, but that was our nickname. We were the closers. And I always joked that somebody was going to deface our sign and get rid of the C, and we were going to be the losers because it was like we were listing properties, but nothing was selling. So I'm like, maybe we should be called the listers. Really, really tough market. But we really just kept pushing through and knew that we wanted to approach things a little differently. Back then, we did all the courses. We did Brian Buffini. I had top producers, my CRM. Like I was going through the grind of, hey, do you know anybody looking to sell real estate? Going through my Facebook contacts, and it just wasn't up. We were like really taking more of a consultant's approach and doing media. And the journey from there to where we are today has a lot of twists and turns, but really came down to us looking every year at our model and making sure that we were tracking to who we wanted to be versus who we thought we needed to be, which first was an agent that sold one house in one neighborhood, then an agent that sold a lot of houses in that neighborhood, a lot of houses in the city, covered a couple different asset classes and territories. And then we started bringing on team members, but we opened up the brokerage in 2015 with the mindset of being like an unbrokerage. So no recruiting. We have a waiting list of, I think, 45 people right now. We only do hirings once or twice a year and only for very specific positions. So it was more of an idea of running it like a professional services company with a digital marketing agency and production company attached. And that's kind of what we've worked towards, right? I feel like I'm only 20% where I want to be. But that's essentially where we are now, is we're a consultant firm where you have Shannon and I. She handles all things business. I handle all things marketing and sales. Underneath us, we have our Navy SEAL teams, which cover our asset classes, plus the supporting team as well, too, which I consider them their own divisions as well.
And how do you balance the dynamic of working with your wife and running a business with your wife? Because, I mean, I love my wife. I don't know if I can run a business with her. So I'm very curious to know how you guys balance that dynamic, because that's a pretty incredible thing to do.
We do and we don't, right? Like the real answer is we're human beings, and I'm sure there's times where we under communicate, which usually leads to misunderstandings, which when we sit down, we always hammer it out. I think the key that we are trying to work towards is, I call it a sync meeting, where we sit down and we actually sync up. Here's everything I'm working on. Here's what my calendar looks like in the next 2 weeks. Any roadblocks that you have, any fires we have to put out. Okay, amazing. I'm off. Ryan actually gave me 2 tips that were actually instrumental. This was back in 2018, before he had any courses or coaching or anything. And he said to me this, he said, give her the ability to veto any meetings after 6 p.m. Always tell her what's coming up, but say, hey, like, if you need me, I'm there. And then my father-in-law, who's another mentor of mine, gave me another tip that I'll also share. He's like, let the equipment rest once a week. So in your 7-day work week, you're not working one day. Sure, every now and then there's a giant fire, something has to happen. Sure, but that's like 2% of your life, really. Pick another day of the week, and that's your partner's day. Because he's in business with his wife to this day. And he would just have one day where she knew she could plan everything she needed to plan, and that was the day, and everything else. And he was there, 40% of the time, 50% of the time, she didn't need him. And then he was off and he's selling cars and doing what he does. But just having that stability and knowing these are the days that I do these things, all of the incremental, hey, got a minute, tend to funnel themselves to those days, right? Just like you guys, as you're running teams and doing what you do, instead of the, hey, got a minute 24/7, you're like, no, team meeting, this is where we talk about those things. It can wait. If giant fire, fine, call me. But it eliminates 90 to 95% of the interruptions, which allow you to do the deep work. I think that's the answer of why I've enjoyed working with her so much, is we try and really work towards that structure. Again, not 100% of the way there by any means, but at least we know that that's what our end game looks like.
Obviously, you guys started the real estate team. A super successful part of your business has also been the media company. At what point did you guys realize, hey, we are really good at this? And was it you that realized? Was it her that realized? At what point did you realize, hey, we're really good at this, and decide that like we're going to put some time, money, and effort here, and whose responsibility it was going to be, and how did you balance keeping the real estate business and your unbrokerage strong and keeping that culture while building a second business on the side?
So I think when we talk about the real estate company and the production company, the production company almost became something where it would have taken away from the real estate company. So at its peak, like when we were really focused on that piece, we were getting so many client services requests, and we ran a quick analysis and we're like, we make so much more money selling real estate. I don't need any more clients. So we made a pivot early on with the media company, where one of the main reasons that we had it is straight competitive advantage. There's not another agent in the city that can do what we do, because they don't own my data. They don't own my production team. They don't know what we're working on. So by the time they try and copy the last video I did, the next 5 concepts I have, good luck, because the time so that was the main reason that we started the media company on the back end. In terms of how we manage it, I think it's going back to your org structure, right? And making sure that you have people that help you manage all the systems and processes, and that you're not the stopgap in it. Going back to Shannon and I and how we operate the brokerage, she handles everything TC, everything HR, like even simple things. Like when we get requests for, hey, Justin, I'm doing a charity drive, can you give me $100? Justin 1.0 would have said, for sure, 100 times over. And that would cause a disagreement, because then we're looking at our P&L, and we get a lot of those requests. So we made a very simple decision early on of, here's the delineation of authority on items. I don't want to manage this. I do, because it affects our bottom line and our P&L. When it comes to creative treatments for videos that we're doing with the production company, and our production company will do work with people that are in alignment with us outside of real estate. We've done hospitality, we've done legal, we've done fitness, we've done a lot of different really cool stuff. I'll be involved in that in terms of strategy and execution to give them deliverables. But at the same time, when it comes to like processing the transaction, Shannon's world. So it's all the same, right? Because media and real estate, it's transaction management, sales and marketing. It's essentially the same framework. But our pillar focus is real estate. That is where everything leads back to. So we do the media work because it actually helps our real estate business quite a bit by proxy. But we're not in the, hey, don't call me for 100 media shoots in London. Don't call me to do your reels. Don't call me to do your listing videos. We don't do that. That's proprietary to Prime. But if you're close enough to us and you like what we do, and you're like, hey, I need to do a really cool 60-second commercial, I've always had an affinity for advertising and marketing and like storytelling. So like we help a certain type of person, if that makes sense.
I want to ask you about something that you said earlier, and it brought up a point. I was with Tom Story last week, Eric Simon from The Broke Agent, Matt Leonetti, and Kaylee Heaps. Yeah. And all of us did talk. And the one thing that came up in everybody's talks, because obviously we didn't plan our talks together, was looking outside of the real estate industry and drawing inspiration from other industries to improve your business. I know you had kind of alluded to that earlier in this conversation, and you're saying that when it comes to the media company, you don't do a whole heck of a lot of work outside of it, but you're still working with some other companies. Like, how important is it to you to look at outside industries for inspiration within the real estate business?
It's everything. So I read a book early on in my career called Blue Ocean Shift, and that talks about swimming to blue oceans, right? Like if everybody's doing that, I've always been countercultural with how people do stuff, probably to my detriment. Like when I could double down on reels and video, like when I see everybody doing the exact same type of reels, I'm like, I just want to do something different, because I find that there's more depth, and I've always converted more on creative things than I did on like bulk and volume, which, to each their own. I think I'll give you an example. So I did a video for Hillcrest. It was a vacant lot north of Goderich, not a very high value sale, but a really cool product, right? And I was inspired by that video by a fly fishing channel I watch on YouTube called Tight Loops, and they use documentary filmmaking, and it was a very different style of cinematography and kind of vlogging. And we did the video that way for that property, and it really did strike a chord. And we ended up selling something that had been on the market for almost a year before we had it. We actually increased the price, and the market wasn't great, right? And we got the deal done. The reason I use that story is when I look for things like that, whether it be Tight Loop or whether it be organizational structure or, companies out there that are doing cool stuff and trying to implement at Prime, if I find stuff that genuinely gets me as excited as I am telling you this story, I feel like even if it's not a win, it is, because you're still practicing the craft, and the success shows up through you actually trying the thing. So like Mike Smith, going full circle, not everything we did work, but we did enough of the things that it did work, right? And I think that's the key is you have to look for inspiration, and then don't try and just rip off and duplicate. Really try and make your own flavor, because Emma, you're uniquely yourself. I'm sure, Ryan, you're uniquely yourself too. And that's where I think the other thing people get paralyzed with when it comes to content creation, calling leads, calling agents, developing relationships is a scarcity mindset, when in reality, there's so much business out there, and Ryan's going to attract a different client than I am, and you as well.
Love it.
You mentioned when we were speaking before we jumped on that you are a huge consumer of content, and you just, talked about there, you take inspiration from different places. Do you have like some favorites that you could share with us of like where you find you constantly get inspiration? Is like there a certain type of content you like to watch, or another like business model, whether it's like gyms or, where you're trying to consume content? Is there just like some specific areas where you find you get the most inspiration, and or another industry that has a lot of great ideas that most realtors don't know how to translate into real estate, but you've had some success with?
Yeah, I think if I'm thinking like overarching business model, I think the Mr. Beast, Patrick Bet-David, those guys are by far like, that's the model, right? Is you basically create your media company. Doesn't even really, it's not a client services business anymore, right? It ends up being your own ecosystem that you probably employ a good group amount of people. You do a whole bunch of stuff, and then you align your ecosystem with other people. Going back to the fishing analogy, the way I think about real estate is, I may have my squad of people that we all go fishing, and I show them my spots, teach them how to fish. We do our thing, but like then they'll align themselves with other groups that fish in different areas. So what they travel, they can interconnect with other businesses. So I think the business models of the future are maybe locally based and supported, but then also in alignment with other people that in the past were deemed their competitors, but are actually sharing and collaborating. And like, fishermen are weird, right? Like if you tell somebody about a fishing spot somebody else showed you, there's this weird kind of thing about it. Same thing in real estate, right? Is if you're cool, I'll show you some really neat stuff. As long as you're cool and you're honest and you treat other people well, if you like turn around and try and like poach my team and just stab me in the back, then that gets through the community. And all of a sudden, like Jazz, for example, is a brother. The amount of calls back and forth between me and him of like, hey, do you know this person? Are they cool? They are? Okay, amazing. Like that's all I need. That's the future. And then in terms of where I look for inspiration, I have a wall of champions, I call it, in my basement. So I turned my gym into my studio during COVID. It's still there. And I have photos of people from all over the world. I have Peter McKinnon up there on the cinematography side. I have Lewis Hamilton, an F1 driver. I have Billy Graham, amazing evangelist and speaker. I can go on, Seth Godin, Gary Vee, Joe Rogan's up there. Like I can go through the list, all walks of life. Marcus Philly, who's a functional bodybuilder, and all these different people. But the one thing with every single one of them, and if I take a photo and share this, you'll see most of the photos I actively took when I built this wall, they're not actually looking at the camera. I printed them all in black and white, and they're looking down or they're looking somewhere else. George St. Pierre is a good example as well, where they are so in tune with the craft that they practice that it doesn't matter that these are some of the biggest names on the planet. If they were by themselves in the gym or in the studio or doing what they were doing, they would have as much love for what they do as they did in front of the biggest crowds you could ever imagine. And I think that's where I draw inspiration from. Sure, those people are all super famous. I also have people on that wall that nobody knows, and people that I meet out there. A young lady I met at Naples Zoo who was the most incredible person in terms of telling us how to experience the zoo and stay away from the bugs and all these interesting facts. And she had Down syndrome, and she told visible, but I never said that because I told you the experience I had with her first. And she said to us at the end that she's like, I know I've got some challenges. And I said to her, not at all. I'm like, you're more capable than 90% of the people I meet out there. And I think she's as inspiring as anybody else. So I look for really people that love what they do and are very authentically themselves. And then I feel like you can draw inspiration from anywhere.
And so is it, obviously it's down in your studio or in your gym, so it's a constant reminder for you every single day. Is that kind of your one secret hack to stay motivated or stay dedicated when the market is tough? Because I think there's a lot of people out there that always ask the question, where do I draw motivation from? Or how do I get inspired? Or how do I get back into my groove? I feel like I got out of my groove. And is it like I constantly look at that every day and I know that I'm underperforming in comparison to these people and they're pulling me up? Or like, what does that look like for you?
Maybe by not thinking about it, like seeing them be like, oh crap, okay, these people are out there. there, right? And in a good way is I almost look up to them like all father figures, put it that way, right? Of, the man that I want to be. I think for myself, because like my story has a sordid past as well too, where I could have been a very different version of myself, potentially dead, potentially in jail, or who even knows, right? And the way that I was able to kind of work towards the person I am today, more than anything, is this. It's having a journal with me and tracking what I want to improve. I've had remarkable tablets, checklists. I've used a million different things you could possibly imagine. I'm not attached to any one thing. I lost my remarkable pen. I think I have a new one coming tomorrow. I'm not attached to the thing. What I am attached to is the daily practice of the very first thing I do is gratitude. And today I was grateful for 2 specific clients that are just very nice people that I just talked to. Freedom, the fact that we live in North America, and my daughter, right? Like very simple things. So the practice of appreciating what you actually have is key, because look at what's happening overseas. Anybody that's complaining about this market needs to check themselves. Like first world problems. We have clean water, we have rule of law, we have food, and we have safety, right? So that's a big part of it. My faith has been insurmountably one of the biggest things that's helped me track, because as I've turned to my faith, I realize who I can be and who I don't want to be, right? If I just look at the 2 pillars of, fruits of the spirit, as I would call it, of being patient, kind, loving, and, expounding positivity to the world versus, being envious, gluttonous, and all these different things that I can fall into by scrolling TikTok or looking at other people. And it's just putting it in front of me and having to look at it and see how I'm tracking over time. That has what led me to where I have at least a clear picture of who I want to become, even if I'm not him yet. And as they say, what gets measured gets improved. So long-winded way of saying, get a journal and start writing in it on a regular basis. That'll make a big difference.
I love that. We actually just had a really great question that was asked. And I wanted to bring this up. I know we're not getting the Q&A yet, but I think this is a really good question to kind of tack on to where we just were. And I'm just going to put a little snippet in there for anybody that's watching or listening. You should really get in the Facebook group, because much like this user just had the opportunity to ask Justin a question. If you are in our Facebook group, we record this podcast live in the Facebook group, and you actually get to ask our guests questions. So I just want to put that in there as a reminder to anybody who's listening. But the question that this person just put in for you was, what is your brutally honest advice to your younger, poorer self?
What is my advice to my younger, poorer self? I would probably just say, shut up and get to work. Like, in all honesty, I was the biggest procrastinator you've ever met. A lot of what I'm talking about, the structure, came 10 years of me procrastinating. And it goes way back to high school. I was the worst. I would do okay, but like I do all my assignments 2 hours before the actual class, or like the night before, even though I had all the time to prepare for it. And I think it's the same thing in real estate. I did a segment last week on my channel about, you have a decision on the words that you use. And a lot of times I would say, one day I'm going to do this. One day I'm going to do that. One day I'm going to sit down and write up my organizational chart. One day I'm going to take that time to spend with my wife. One day I'm going to play with my kid. Or you have the opportunity of choosing tomorrow as your day one. It took me probably more than half my career to start deciding today is going to be my day one. Now, I'm not going to discount my past, and I think it made me resilient. But if I knew what I know now and I got to start all over again, I think I'd be light years ahead of where I am today, because what we've done in the last 5 years, I feel like in the next 5, we're going to accomplish what would probably take me 10 or 20.
That's amazing. So obviously journaling is a big piece, but obviously, you talked a bit about there and made mention to the person you've become and how different you are from who you were in the past. Shifting to a business standpoint, is there like one book you've read, course you've taken, mentor you've worked with that really changed the way you thought about business, or made you a better salesperson, or made you a better marketer? I know you mentioned Blue Ocean earlier, but is there like one particular book, course, mentor, podcast that you really felt like helped turn you into the Justin Konikow you are today as a realtor versus when you got into the business?
I think it's a bit of a moving target and an amalgamation of a few. So I'll mention kind of the journey as I think about it, because Gary Vee was for sure one of the first. And this was actually back in 2012 or 13 when he did his talk with Remax, before he was Gary Vee. And he talked about the thank you economy and like how it used to be where you knew your cobbler and your butchers and all those things. That was a huge part of it, right? Was just getting back to a community vibe when it came to marketing and kind of going down that path. And actually the Daily V was what got me started. I started doing the closers daily. You can still search that hashtag on Instagram. You'll see terrible videos of me from 2015 doing daily videos before short form was a thing. And then as I went down that path, there's a lot of people that have helped, and it's usually practitioners. So I would say the mentors that have helped me, be it Scott, be it Ryan, be it, David, Jason, I can go down the list of Larry, I can think of Mike, I can think of even people now that don't, like Peter McKinnon doesn't realize he's a mentor of mine. I am once removed from him. So one of my interns is actually buddies with his main editor. I'm working on trying to get a podcast with Peter right now. He doesn't know who I am. He's no clue. But it's an amalgamation of all these people that are practitioners at their craft and just constantly exposing myself to them without becoming tribal about them. And this is an important thing, right? Because I think a lot of times people fall into groupthink and lose their individual identity because they're like, if I just copy Gary Vee, then I'm going to be awesome. And then they, like massive YouTube streamers, will go out there and create real communities and make real money and then completely implode because it's not sustainable because they aren't actually who they are. So even Ryan, like Ryan Serhant, one of the biggest names in real estate, met him in 2018. Jazz actually hooked me up with him initially. Jazz had asked me, he's like, hey, I want to get started on YouTube. Jazz doesn't even use a laptop. I went to his office, brought my team, like, this is how you do it. Left, and then he did what he did. And I'm like, okay, Jazz, you went a little bit far, but it's all good. Jazz went, shot his first podcast with Ryan, came back, he's like, dude, you got to meet. And Jazz was one of the people that had actually brought me in to work with Scott at the beginning. So I was like, well, I think you're crazy, but sure, whatever. I went down to meet Ryan. For all his acumen, for all of his fame, I still tell people this to this day. The reason that I've maintained the relationship and it's continued to grow with Ryan is, above all, he's a practitioner. If you're going in alignment with him because you think the photo op will get you access to other people or it'll get you business, it's not going to as much as you think it will. The benefit of being around practitioners and mentors was this one simple fact, is if you bring a mentor a complex problem, watch them light up, even as if you're not in the room. Same thing if like somebody calls me, they're like, I'm launching a private jet company. I want to do a cool piece of content around. I'm going to kind of even forget about them. Be like, if I ran that company, I wonder what type of content I would make. It's been the exact same with every mentor I've ever met. They light up solving problems. And the key to the relationships with these mentors over time is when they give you the advice, it doesn't mean that that's the answer. It means that's what they think. You get to go out and implement maybe a portion of their answer or your interpretation of it. But when you go back to them a year later, if you go back to them and you're like, hey, remember that problem? This is what I did and this is what happened. You're going to watch them light up even more and get more access to them than you ever thought, and come prepared with a new complex problem. And you're actually making them better because by them solving the Rubik's Cube, they maybe pull something out of that they're going to implement in their business. And it's been like that with Ryan and pretty much all my mentors. So I can't pin down one, but that's kind of the through line that I've seen through all of them.
It's funny that you mentioned that and that you were talking about Jazz, because I had that full circle moment with him when he was on our podcast. I went to go meet him like 3 years ago. And when I went into his office, he had one of those little signs that basically said like, welcome Emma. And I was like, I was the one who asked you for a meeting and you're welcoming me with a gift and making me feel like amazing. And I will never forget how he made me feel in that moment. And immediately I ended up taking that concept to my buyer consultations, where I have a TV behind me in my office at home. And when I do a buyer consultation, I'd put like welcome, whatever their name is, on the virtual thing. That's awesome. I told him that when he came on the podcast, and I was like, I don't think you even know this, but when I came into your office, you inspired me so much with just that little gesture that I now do that in my business. And it was exactly what you said. He lit up. He was like, I can't believe it. And it's like, that thing has changed my business, and it's got me so much further and such deeper connections with, not only converting leads, but with having the relationship with my clients. And so I just really wanted to echo what you said there, is like, if you are seeking a mentor or you are a mentor to somebody else, that, giving someone the advice, not necessarily taking the entire thing, but taking a portion of it and then coming back and telling them that you've actually implemented a portion of it and how it's changed your business, is the thing where you're going to see them be like, we need to do this again, because that made me feel so good.
It's fun. Energy creates energy, right? And what you said, on the buyer consult portion, people want to be seen, they want to be loved, right? So just acknowledging and looking people in the eye and connecting with them versus the world we live in, where everybody's got their heads down. You go to the bank teller, nobody's connecting as a human. I think that's key. But also getting around people like Jazz and other people that light up. It's an infection, right? And like people probably think I'm on drugs because of my energy levels and stuff like that too. And I used to be. I've been sober for over a decade, so I'm not anymore.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, but that's a me thing, right? Like other people can control themselves and I can't. Like I do everything over and beyond, including drugs. So, I think get around people that have that infectious kind of energy and you can't help but get like Amy. Like I spent time with Amy at Steve's event and we connected because of other people that were there that were cool. I've known Jesse Peters for over a decade. I've known Brad for quite some time. And Amy I had just met and her energy was infectious. And like we were talking about business and models and all kinds of different stuff too. And I'm sure I took stuff from her and implemented in my business. And, I think that's the world, that the one I want to be in, is where you have contributing members that are all building the campsite together and doing it in their own way, shape, and form. And sure, we may get in disagreements and do it in different ways, flavors, and have opinions about different stuff. And that's okay. That's how the world used to be. I just feel like we've gotten too compartmentalized and too much on separate teams. We need more unity, right? So
love it. I want to do something
amazing
different as we approach as we get kind of closer to the hour here. We haven't done this yet, Ryan. So this is going to be something that I'm curious to see how this goes. But we just got that question for you, which was kind of like, it really made you think, Justin, which was like, what was your brutally honest advice to your younger, poorer self? What is one question that you would ask back to the audience that they should take after listening to this and really think about it in that capacity? Like, what is the one thing that is going to make them ponder and making their business better or the end of the year better or themselves better that you would love to ask?
I'll give them an actual action item. This is one of my favorite things to do because we're talking to real estate people, right? I'm assuming, or anybody in business, I guess. Well, I'll make it general for business, but look at your transactions from last year, right? And put them out on a spreadsheet, every single name. And then here's your homework. List them 1 out of 10. So go one by one and rank them 1 out of 10, but 7 is not enough. So the goal would be identify your 8s to 10s and do way more of that because you clearly like doing those transactions. And you can even write like, why did it make it an 8 to 10? And maybe it's because of the types of people, the types of transactions, whatever. Look at your like 1 to 3s, probably decide that that's not your people and refer that out next time instead of taking those deals. And then your 4 to 6s, ask yourself, is there anything about this that I could have done better that would have turned it to an 8? So maybe like I didn't communicate enough and the trust wasn't there. Like maybe it's something you can improve in your business, or is it something that you could turn into an 8? And if not, is it a type of transaction you want to do again? I think just by actually going through and measuring, you're going to naturally see what you're good at. And then also, like if you want to add a third column and get real deep, you can actually go through and say, how did I bring value? What could I improve on the transactions? And the things on how did you bring value? You should be probably doing yourself or like touching because you like doing it. So storytelling, strategy, negotiations for me. What could I improve on? Communicating to my clients what I'm doing because I'm doing so much of it, right? Like I should delegate that, right? So I think if you can go through all your transactions and make a good amount of time for deep work on that, the clarity you'll have on your business in 2024 will change everything.
I love that. There you go, guys. This is a great action item that you should take away right away.
Yeah, it was perfect. I think that's probably one of the most tactical things that we've had on the podcast. I mean, right now, given the market conditions, there's a lot of agents out there wondering, what should I do or how do I get more business? And I think going that deep and being insightful as to who do you guys like working with? Why did you like working with them? What made the transaction so fun or so easy? Was it you? Was it them? Was it a combination of both of you? And then the other thing that you said there, I think a lot of agents are uncomfortable with, but that's like referring the business away that isn't in alignment with your goals or making you happy. And do you have any recommendations on getting over that hurdle? Because I think there's so many agents that are like, I don't want to give away this business. And then they delve into the transaction or they delve into the process with someone and they're like, it's a sunken cost fallacy. I should have given this away at the beginning, right?
Yeah, I mean, we all know that guttural kind of feeling. You're like, oh, my spidey sense is going up. I have one right now. I'm like, it's not for me. I know it isn't. I took time out of my schedule for this person because of the relationship with the person who referred it. I'm referring it out. I'm not going to talk. I think the first thing I would say, referral business is the best type of business because you hand it off. You can monitor it, but it doesn't require you to be actively involved. So like think about Would you prefer to have 7 or 100% of one transaction, or all of a sudden you start referring more out, you have more time, you have more referrals, or have 25% of 100 transactions? Like, make it a pillar of your business, in my opinion. I also think too, innately, you will never become exceptional at the things that you should probably become exceptional at until you let go of the things that you are not exceptional at. And I think it's one of the hardest things, and it's always going to be a moving target. It's not going to be perfect, but nor is life, right? Life is messy, it's bumpy, but it's part of learning. And when you, I, and Ryan look at the people we admire, I could flip this podcast right over and ask you the same question. I bet you unequivocally, if you listed your mentors, they all got to where they got by saying no to the wrong things and saying yes to the right things.
I love it. That was amazing.
I think I need to take a little bit of your medicine, because I think it's easy to get caught up in the opportunity and not think about, not be overly thoughtful about what does this opportunity mean. And I know that you had mentioned that with your wife about, things that you had invested in, and it's like, is this actually in alignment with where we want to go, or is this like a very short-sighted thing that is going to make me unhappy in 2 weeks from now because it seemed like a good opportunity at the time? And I'm not sure if you've ever listened to the podcast Smartly with Jason Bateman. Okay, so it's Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes. It's amazing.
That's awesome.
You should
I'm looking it up right now.
So good. So Jason Bateman said that he had this same thing in one of the podcasts, and he said, if somebody asked me to do something in 3 weeks, I'll think about in 3 weeks, if somebody was to ask me to do this thing, would I still want to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And before I commit to it, I'll be like, no, I'm not. If I'm not jumping out of my chair in 3 weeks to do this thing, it seems like a good opportunity now, I'm not going to commit to it. And I'm like, that's actually a very good way to look at things. Is like, it seems amazing in this moment, I'm going to commit to it. But if I wake up in 3 weeks from now, would I still have the same excitement and same commitment to this? And if the answer is very likely not, I'm not going to commit to it today.
It's like buying camera gear and media equipment, right? It's like, put it on a list and ask yourself in a month if you actually need it. I think that's a great piece of advice.
You still need it.
Yeah, I mean, we can convince ourselves of a lot of things, right? And I also want to put a giant asterisk on all this too. I explained to you my travel schedule before we were talked, and I'm redlining right now. Like, I need to take my own advice. I've overcommitted. My schedule is ridiculous. I'm traveling a bunch, coming to the GTA in a couple weeks, and but I'm in that season. I also know come mid-December when everybody winds down, I'm going to have them. So have a little bit of grace for yourself. If you don't have the perfect business, if you don't have the perfect journal, you don't have the perfect client list, neither do I. I said all this stuff as more like me putting it out there to the world because I'm working towards that. But Don't be hard on yourself and dequalify yourself because you're not there yet. Again, just choose. Are you going to put these things off and do it one day, or are you going to make tomorrow your day one?
Amazing. I love it. I think that's that is like a great cap to the episode. So I just wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here with us, man. This has been, I think I've learned so much in the podcast. I think I have to re-listen to this and just take some of the medicine that you dished out today and implement it in my own business, because there's so many things to unpack. I have to say my favorite moment was when you talked about gym bombs, though, because I'm pretty sure that my era was the reason why you got out of gym bombs, because we were pretty wild in 2012. But for our audience that wants to follow you, where is the best, what's the best way for them to go about getting connected with you?
Just my name on all the platforms. So if you go to YouTube, that's a lot of what we discussed. I've done videos on over the last couple of years. I've only really started working on my channel in the last year. And again, I have a very different model in terms of how I do things. So I'm not looking for anything. A lot of times I just like putting ideas out into the ether and just like going through the process of collaborating with people. In terms of actually reaching me directly, go to Instagram, send me a DM. I actually manage that myself too. And if you got any value from this, the biggest thing that you could do is the Prime People podcast. I have guests like Emma and so many other amazing people. Go check out the podcast. That's pretty much it.
The podcast is amazing.
Awesome.
100% go check it out. You should check out my episode with Justin too, in case you want to know more about me.
You definitely should.
I was just kidding. Thank you, Justin. We appreciate you, and we hope.
Thank you so much, Justin.
Okay, see you guys. Have a great day. Chat Amy for you. Goodbye.
Cheers.